Sophia Popham was at the rain gauge pillar at the school garden of Kingsgate Street, Winchester, taking the 8 o'clock reading of the soft grey Saturday morning of the 7th of November 1818. Rain had come through the night on a mild southwest wind, and the copper funnel had taken the whole of it in the level Hampshire fashion of a November night. She drew the glass measure from the gauge with an ungloved hand, held it up at the pale light along the garden wall, and read the night's fall at the engraved scale, 4/10 of an inch and a little over. The boy with the Winchester Express came through the garden gate at the lane and knocked twice at the school's south door before the maid could reach it. Sophia Popham was slender, 5'5" upright, with the quiet gravity of a cathedral city schoolroom. Dark chestnut-brown hair, parted smooth at the centre and pinned in a low plaited knot at the nape under a plain dark cap. Clear hazel eyes the colour of beech leaves at autumn. Fair Hampshire complexion faintly warmed by down-walking, in a dark stuff gown with a slate-grey wool shawl, crossed at the bodice against the November garden. The express boy laid the folded letter to her ungloved hand at the south door and stepped back to the gravel of the lane. The cool, damp air of the Itchen Valley came in at the door behind him. The letter was a heavy, folded sheet under a crimson wafer seal, directed in a clerk's even round hand to Miss Sophia Popham at Miss Ulriesford's School for Young Ladies, Kingsgate Street, Winchester. She broke the seal at the threshold. The soft, hard click of the wax was the only sound at the passage. The first 4 lines named her great-uncle, Mr. Erasmus Popham of Popham Court, in the parish of Popham on the Bourne, 10 miles northwest of Winchester at the headwaters of the Bourne, dead at his house on the Friday morning of the 30th of October, last in the 82nd year of his age, and named Sophia sole heiress under his last will and testament, lately admitted to probate. The solicitor's hand was Mr. Twyford's of St. Thomas Street, Winchester. Mrs. Stockbridge, the school cook, was at the passage door with the breakfast tray still at her broad red hands. She declared at her warm Hampshire worry that surely Miss Sophia should sit down at once, that estate-keeping at a chalk country manor was no work for a curate's daughter, and that Sir Gerard Brocas of Sherfield Park should have the court by Lady Day, as all the world this side of Basingstoke had said these 10 years past. "Sir Gerard shall have it," said her sticky label voice at the passage door. "Sir Gerard shall have it." Sophia did not answer her. She went back up the garden to the gauge pillar and finished the morning reading in the order her own 11 years had fixed it. The thermometer at the shaded north wall stood at 43 degrees. The small walnut-cased barometer at the schoolroom passage stood at 29.54, risen a tenth since the Friday night. The wind at the vane above the Kingsgate roofs lay southwest and falling light. The sky was breaking to the southeast, the night's grey sheet opening at the forenoon into the round white heads Mr. Luke Howard's essay had taught her to call cumulus when she was a girl of 15 at her father's knee. She carried the figures indoors to the marbled board quarto journal at the schoolroom window, drew the inkstand to her right hand, and wrote at the head of the open page in her even script, Winchester Saturday, 7th November 1818. Night's rain, 0.43 in Caesar, therm and C 43. Glass 29.54, rising. Wind SW, falling light. Cloud breaking southeast at the forenoon, cumulostratus opening to cumulus. The 12th November of this journal. The Winchester Express at the garden gate at the 8 o'clock reading. 2 questions stood at her hand when the entry was blotted. The first was the matter of the paper alluded to at the foot of Mr. Twyford's letter as a paper lately lodged at the registry and requiring the court's notice at the Tuesday following chambers, reading at St. Thomas Street. The second was whether the weather journal of 11 years should continue at the school garden of Kingsgate Street or be carried up into the chalk to Popham Court, and whether a schoolmistress of 26 could be asked to keep a manor, a home farm, and a parish at her single hand. Neither the breaking November sky at the schoolroom window, nor the warm coal at the schoolroom grate offered to answer at the present hour. Mrs. Stockbridge at the passage door had her sticky label murmur at her mouth still, "Sir Gerard shall have it." And Sophia did not turn at the murmur. She read Mr. Twyford's letter the second time at the schoolroom writing table. The solicitor had set out at the second page that her great-uncle's last will and testament had been admitted to probate at Winchester on the Friday morning of the 6th of November, that he begged Miss Popham to attend at his chambers at St. Thomas Street at the Tuesday following, the 10th of November, at the forenoon, that he should have the will, the housekeeper's keys, and the bank draft at her hand at the chambers, and that a folded paper had been lodged on the Friday afternoon by one Sir Gerard Brocas of Sherfield Park, near Odiham, nephew of the late Mrs. Arabella Popham, claiming a trust by parole over the whole of the Popham estate, founded upon some matter said to have passed at Popham Court at the Michaelmas of this present year, 1818. The solicitor did not set out the substance of the claim. He set out only that the paper had been lodged, that it was sworn, and that the matter should be heard out in its proper order. Sophia drew a sheet of the school letter paper to her hand, and wrote one line in her even script in answer. "I shall attend at your chambers at St. Thomas Street at the Tuesday forenoon. Sophia Popham, Saturday 7th November 1818, Kingsgate Street." She folded the sheet, set the school wafer to it, directed it to Mr. Twyford at St. Thomas Street, and gave it to the garden boy to carry down through the close at the noon hour. Then she went up to the parlour over the schoolroom, and told Miss Alresford what the express had brought. Miss Alresford had kept the school at Kingsgate Street for 31 years, and she heard the letter through with her needle at rest in her lap. She said at the end of it, in the dry, kind voice the school had run upon all those years, that she had buried too many novels' worth of nonsense in her time to tell Miss Popham that a manor was a misfortune, that the second mistress's place would be filled by Candlemas, and the school would stand, and that a young woman who had kept a rain gauge through 11 winters without missing a morning might be trusted, in her considered opinion, with anything in the county of Southampton that did not actually require a regiment. She said also, more gently, that Sophia's father would have been glad, and her mother more glad still, and that the school would want her at the Christmas concert, notwithstanding any number of estates. Then she took up the needle again, which at Miss Alresford's was the customary sign that sentiment had closed. Sophia went down to the schoolroom at the afternoon, and heard the younger girls at their geography as on any Saturday. The long roller map of the 2 hemispheres pulled down across the schoolroom wall, and the pointer passing from Cape Finisterre to the Bay of Bengal at the accustomed pace. If her mind was at a flint-banded house in the chalk she had never seen, her voice did not say so, and only once, when little Patience Overton asked whether the trade winds blew always from the one quarter, and why, did the mistress's answer run a sentence longer than the lessons strictly required. Of her great-uncle Mr. Erasmus Popham, Sophia knew at that Saturday evening little more than the world knew. He was her late father's uncle, the younger brother of her grandfather, and the 2 brothers had divided in the year 1779 in the quiet Hampshire fashion, without a quarrel that anyone could name, and without a correspondence that anyone could produce. The elder brother had gone into the church and died poor at his curacy. The younger had had Popham Court of their father, married Miss Arabella Brocas of Sherfield in 1782, buried her childless in 1801, and lived on at the headwaters of the Bourne another 17 years, a tall spare figure at the rim of the county's knowledge, seen at Winchester twice a year at the bank and the booksellers, bareheaded at all weathers, and famous for one thing only. Mr. Erasmus Popham kept the weather. He had begun the Popham Register on the 1st of January 1778, in the 40th year of his age, and he had not broken it since. 3 times in every day of 41 years, At 8 in the morning, at 2 in the afternoon, at 10 at night, the master of Popham Court had gone to his instruments and set down what the air of the Bourne Valley was doing. The mercurial barometer by Carey of the Strand at its mahogany alcove in the South Library. The pair of sixes self-registering thermometers at the shaded north wall. The copper rain gauge at its white wooden pillar on the south lawn. The wind vane on the stable cupola read against the compass card. The face of the sky written out in plain Hampshire English, and after the year 3 in Mr. Howard's New Latin also. 12 readings short of 45,000, the Hampshire Chronicle would write at his death, and the figure was not far wrong. The farmers of 3 parishes had set their hay by him. The coach office at Andover had sent a boy up the Bourne before more than one great snow. It was said at the market ordinaries that Popham of Popham could smell a gale 2 days off, and it was said truly, though what he had was not a nose, but a glass, a gauge, and 41 years of his own arrears. All this Sophia had from the county's common stock, and one thing more she had from her own childhood. Her father, the Reverend Walter Popham, curate of Compton by Winchester, had kept a small weather diary of his own at the parsonage window, in the manner of clergymen of the old school, and had told his daughter once, she was perhaps 9, that the keeping of it was in the family, that his uncle at the Bourne Head had the longest private register in the south of England, and that the damask rose and the dripping June and the Popham obstinacy ran together in the blood. When Sophia at 15 had asked leave to begin a journal of her own, her father had given her the shagreen-cased pocket thermometer that had been his father's, shown her how to rule the columns, and said that a register once begun was a promise made to every day that should come after, and was to be kept as promises are kept. She had begun it at Lady Day, 1807. Her father had died at the Tuesday of the 24th of January 1815, at the hard frost, and the thermometer in its green shagreen case had gone on her black ribbon from that month, and the journal had not missed a morning between that day and this. It was the journal, in a roundabout way, that had brought her the only message she had ever had from Popham Court. For 3 years past, the Hampshire Chronicle had printed at the month's end a short table of the Winchester rain and the Winchester glass, signed only S.P., Kingsgate Street, the work of a schoolmistress who supposed nobody read it. At the August of 1817, a single sheet had come to the school by the carrier, unsigned, in a strong old-fashioned hand, sealed with a plain green wafer. It contained no compliment and no question. It contained the Bourne Valley rainfall for the July, set against her printed Winchester figures in 2 ruled columns, with one line at the foot. The chalk drinks a tenth more at the hill than the city knows. P. She had answered to Popham Court with her September table and one line of thanks, and had had nothing back. She had supposed the old man satisfied, or dead, or both. She had kept the sheet folded at the back board of her journal, because a register once begun is a promise, and because the hand at the foot of it was her father's hand, grown old. On the Sunday, she went to the early service at the cathedral, as on every Sunday, and sat at the accustomed bench under the great grey forest of the nave with the school's 6 boarders ranged at her left. The lesson was from the 8th chapter of Genesis, the going forth from the ark, and Sophia, hearing the dove and the olive leaf and the promise that seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night should not cease, kept her eyes level at the prayer book, and thought of a man she had never seen taking his 10 o'clock reading alone in a South Library for 41 years. If that was a kind of prayer, she concluded, it was at the least a kind the 8th chapter of Genesis would own. On the Monday she set the school in order against her going. She heard the elder girls at their French and the younger at their sums, wrote out for Miss Alresford the list of where each class stood and what each girl wanted watching, and took the noon reading at the gauge pillar with little Patience Overton at her elbow, who was 8, and the dressmaker's niece, and who had appointed herself assistant to the rain gauge ever since she had discovered that the measuring glass made the garden wall look bent. The glass stood at 29.71 and rising. The wind had gone north of west. The night would be clear, and the Tuesday would be fair, and Sophia wrote both in the journal, and both were so. On the Tuesday forenoon of the 10th of November, 1818, she walked down through the Kingsgate and along the close wall to St. Thomas Street, with her mother's small silver locket at her throat and her father's thermometer in her reticule, and was shown up at the first knock to Mr. Twyford's chambers, where a coal fire burned level in the grate, and the morning's grey light lay along a green baize writing table, cleared of everything but 5 several items and the will. Mr. Twyford was 63, a Winchester solicitor of 40 years' standing, in plain black superfine, with attentive grey eyes behind gold-rimmed spectacles. He rose at her coming, named her at once for her father's daughter. He had known the Reverend Walter Popham, he said, at the visitation dinners, a man whose word wanted no seal, and set the chair for her at the green baize with the grave courtesy of his trade. A clerk brought in the will in its tape. Mr. Twyford broke the tape, begged Miss Popham's patience for the length of the instrument, and read it through to her from the first word to the last in the level, unhurried voice of a man who holds that a will is read once, properly, or not at all. This is the last will and testament of me. Erasmus Popham of Popham Court in the parish of Popham on the Bourne in the county of Southampton, Esquire, made this 12th day of October, in the year of our Lord, 1818, I being of sound and disposing mind and memory, though of a great age, for which I thank God, and a dry house. First, I direct that my just debts, my funeral expenses, and the charges of proving this, my will be fully paid and satisfied, and my funeral, I desire, may be plain, at the parish church of St. Swithin of Popham on the Bourne, at the morning, without hired mourning, and without any feathers. Item, I give and devise my capital messuage or mansion house, called Popham Court, with the gardens, orchards, stables, barns, dove-house, and appurtenances thereto belonging, together with my home farm, and all my several closes of arable, pasture, downland, and water-meadow, in the said parish, containing by estimation 620 acres, be the same, more or less, with their rights, members, and appurtenances, unto my great niece, Sophia Popham, of the city of Winchester, schoolmistress, only daughter of my late nephew, the Reverend Walter Popham, clerk, sometime curate of Compton in the said county, to hold to her, her heirs, and assigns, for ever. Item, I give and bequeath unto the said Sophia Popham the sum of £3,100, now standing in my name, in the 3 per centum consolidated bank annuities, together with all my plate, linen, china, books, prints, and household furniture whatsoever at Popham Court. Item, I give and bequeath unto the said Sophia Popham my mercurial barometer by carry, my thermometers of 6's construction, my rain gauge of copper with its glass measures, my wind vane, and all my other instruments of observation whatsoever, together with the 41 volumes of my meteorological register, kept by me at Popham Court from the 1st day of January 1778 unto this present time, and all the loose papers, tables, and correspondence belonging thereto. And I make to her herein one request only, which I make a request, and not a condition, knowing the blood she comes of, that the Popham register be not broken. Item, I give and bequeath unto the said Sophia Popham the pearl necklace that was my mother's, called the Popham Pearls, now lying in the velvet case at the South Library writing table, and I desire she may wear them without melancholy, the women of this family having ever worn them longer than the men deserved. Item, I give and bequeath unto my butler, John Hambledon, in acknowledgment of 31 years' honest service, an annuity of £20 for his life, and my second best watch, unto my housekeeper, Mrs. Martha Sparshalt, an annuity of £20 for her life, and the furniture of her own chamber, unto my steward, Mr. Longstock, the sum of £50, and my brown cob, he knowing the cob's opinions better than any man living, and unto every other servant living in my service, at my decease, 1 full year's wages over and above what shall be owing. Item, I give and bequeath the sum of £25 unto the minister and churchwardens of the said parish of Popham on the Bourne, to be laid out in bread and in coals for the poor of the parish at the Christmas next after my decease, and the like sum every Christmas after during the minority of this bequest's memory, which I leave to the parish's conscience, having found it a good one. Item, I give and bequeath unto Sir Gerard Brocas, Baronet of Sherfield Park, nephew of my late dear wife, the miniature of his aunt by Mr. Engelhart, in its case of red morocco, trusting that he will value it at its true worth. And all the rest, residue and remainder of my estate, and effects whatsoever and wheresoever, both real and personal, I give, devise, and bequeath unto the said Sophia Popham, her heirs, executors, and assigns, absolutely and for ever, and I appoint my friend, Mr. Twyford of St. Thomas Street, Winchester, gentleman, sole executor of this my will, in trust for the said Sophia Popham, and I revoke all former wills by me at any time heretofore made. In witness whereof, I have hereunto set my hand and seal at Popham Court in the parish of Popham on the Bourne, aforesaid this 12th day of October, in the year of our Lord 1818. Erasmus Popham. Signed, sealed, published, and declared by the above-named Erasmus Popham, as and for his last will and testament, in the presence of us, who, at his request, and in his presence, and in the presence of each other, have hereunto subscribed our names as witnesses, Penton, Clerk in Holy Orders, Rector of St. Swithin's of Popham on the Bourne, Longstock, Steward of Popham Court. Mr. Twyford laid the will at the side table when the reading was done and turned to Sophia at the grey light of the sash. He drew across the green baize, one at a time, 5 several items at her hand. The first was a fair copy of the will in his clerk's even round hand, folded twice, and ribbon-bound at the foot. The second was a brass ring of 6 keys, the south porch, the south library, the plate closet, the still room, the walled garden, and the long garret over the east wing where the spare instruments were kept. The third was the bank draft for the £3,100 at the 3 per cents, drawn at his own hand. The fourth was a sealed letter, superscribed in a strong, old-fashioned hand, to my great niece, to be given into her own hand and no other, and to be read by her at Popham Court and nowhere else, under the plain green wafer she knew. The fifth was the calling card of the Reverend Josiah Penton, rector of St. Swithin's of Popham on the Bourne. Sophia looked at the green wafer a long moment, and laid the letter unopened in her reticule beside the thermometer. Then she folded her hands at the edge of the green baize and asked the one question she had carried down through the close that morning. Mr. Twyford, the paper lodged by Sir Gerard Brocas, what does it claim, and what does it rest upon? Mr. Twyford took off the gold spectacles, polished them at his handkerchief without hurry, and set them back. He said that the paper claimed a trust by parole, a trust resting upon spoken words, declared, as Sir Gerard's affidavit had it, by Mr. Erasmus Popham in his lifetime, under which the whole of the Popham estate, the house, the lands and the funds, ought in conscience and in equity to descend to Sir Gerard at the testator's death, subject only to a charge of an annuity of £200 a year to Miss Popham for her life, in consideration of her being, as the affidavit expressed it, a deserving young person of the testator's remoter blood. He said that the words were sworn to have been spoken at Popham Court at a private interview between Sir Gerard and the testator on Michaelmas Day, last, the 29th of September 1818, 5 weeks and a day before the testator's death, and a fortnight before the date of the will itself. He said that Sir Gerard had given notice through his attorney that he should attend at Popham Court, with counsel, on Wednesday the 9th of December, to state his claim to the heiress in person before carrying the matter to the courts, such attendance being represented as a courtesy. He said, replacing the will in its tape, that a parole trust set up against a plain devise in a will 14 days younger than the spoken words was a thing the courts had small appetite for, but that it was a thing requiring to be answered all the same, exactly, and to the day, and that he should be present at Popham Court on the 9th of December if Miss Popham wished it. "I do wish it, Mr. Twyford," said Sophia, "and I shall be glad to know what answer the day itself can be brought to give him." If the solicitor found anything odd in the form of the sentence, he did not say so. He walked her down to the street door himself, and stood bareheaded at the step in the November air, while the heiress of Popham Court turned up St. Thomas Street toward the Close, a slender, upright figure in mourning black, with all her great-uncle's keys in her reticule, walking neither fast nor slow under the breaking grey sky she had promised the school at the Monday noon. The fortnight between the Chamber's reading and the leaving of Winchester went in the quiet ordering of two lives, the one she was closing and the one she had not yet seen. She wrote to the Reverend Josiah Penton that she should come up to the Bourne on Tuesday the 24th of November, and had back a letter of welcome in a round scholarly hand, with a postscript that the late Mr. Popham's dog, a liver and white pointer of advanced years named Drift, had taken up a station at the south porch from which no persuasion of the household could move him at the accustomed reading hours, and that the writer hoped Miss Popham was not averse to dogs of settled habits. She wrote to Mrs. Sparsholt, the housekeeper, that no ceremony of any kind was to be made. She took her last Saturday cloud lesson with the school's younger girls at the garden, the whole class ranged at the gauge pillar, naming cumulus and stratus, and the high mare's tails of cirrus at the top of the November blue, and little Patience Overton was permitted, as a parting honour, to read the glass herself, and to enter the figure in the journal at Sophia's own handrest, which she did with her tongue at the corner of her mouth, and the figure only 1/10 wrong, and corrected. On the Tuesday morning of the 24th of November 1818, the hired post-chaise stood at the school gate at first light, and Sophia Popham in her mourning black, with the slate-grey travelling pelisse over it. The marbled board journal wrapped first in clean linen at the inner corner of her travelling case, the shagreen thermometer at her reticule, the 6 Popham keys at her pocket, and the sealed green-wafered letter at her breast pocket still unread, stepped up into the chaise with the gentle gravity of the Kingsgate schoolroom, and the chaise rolled out of the city by the west gate at the soft, pale grey light, up onto the open chalk, where the Roman road runs string-straight between the bare beech-hangers, past the sheepfolds of Worthy Down standing silver at the frost, and at the 9th mile drew up briefly at the wayside inn at Sutton Scotney for the post-boy to water the pair, and for Miss Popham to take a plain half-cup at the north parlour window, where she looked out at the down country rising fold over fold to the north-west, pale green and chalk-white and silent, with one buzzard turning at the top of the morning. And at the gentle close of the halt, the chaise rolled on through Whitchurch at the Young Test, and turned at the bend beyond the silk mill up the narrow valley of the Bourne, where the Winterbourne ran thin and bright at the meadow's foot after the November rains, past the flint cottages of the lower hamlet with their wood smoke standing straight up at the still air, and at the lane's last rise, drew up at the south porch of Popham Court in the early grey afternoon. The south porch of Popham Court stood under stone-mullioned windows in a face of napped flint and pale grey stone laid checkerwise, the fashion of the year 1701, 2 stories and attics under stone tiles, 3 chimneys at the ridge, and on the worn step of the porch, the household stood ranged in the level Hampshire fashion the Popham family had kept all their days. Mr. Hambledon the butler, 63, 31 years at the court, in plain black, with his staff of office nowhere about him, because Mr. Popham had never suffered one. Mrs. Sparsholt the housekeeper, 58, iron grey under a linen cap, the chatelaine at her waist, her daughter Miss Tabitha Sparsholt, 19, in grey print, at her mother's shoulder, Mr. Longstock the steward, 55, weathered as a gatepost, with his hat in both hands, the kitchen and the yard at the gravel's edge, and lying across the threshold stone itself, grey-muzzled, amber-eyed, with his white-tipped tail making one slow stroke of welcome, and his body making no motion whatever to clear the doorway, the elderly liver and white pointer, Drift, who had decided 25 days before that nobody should enter Popham Court without his review, and who now looked up at Sophia Popham's face for a long considering moment, the household watching, and rose and stepped aside and walked at her skirt's hem through the south door as though the appointment had been his own idea from the beginning. Mrs. Sparsholt took her through the house at a gentle pace, the south hall with its stone flags and the long case clock by Bangor of Andover, the dining room at the east, the morning room at the west, the still room and the plate closet at their keys, the staircase of dark oak rising at shallow steps hung with Pophams of the last century, and at the half-landing one small portrait apart from the rest, a spare upright man of middle age in the dress of 40 years gone, bareheaded, with a long weathered face, neither smiling nor severe, painted standing at a window, with one hand resting flat upon a closed marbled book, and behind him at the painted sash a sky of breaking grey cloud done with more care than painters commonly spend on sky. "The master, miss, in the year 85, said Mrs. Sparsholt at the half-landing. He would have the book in, and he would have the clouds right. The painter was 11 days at the clouds. We heard a deal about it below stairs that autumn." Sophia stood at the half-landing a moment, with the November light at the portrait's face, and the painted hand at rest on the closed register, and said nothing, and went up. Her own chamber was at the south front, over the library, plain and warm, with the down rising at the window, and the beech hanger at the crest of it. And when her case was brought up and Mrs. Sparsholt's step had gone along the passage, Sophia stood a while at the cold sash, watching the early dusk come up the valley, the Winterbourne's thread going pewter at the meadow foot, the wood smoke of the village laying itself in a level blue shelf along the lane, the rooks coming home to the hanger in long untidy strings, and found that her hand had gone of itself to the breast pocket where the green wafered letter lay. Not yet, she told the window. The letter was to be read at Popham Court. It should be read in the room the man himself had kept, at the hour he had kept it. At 6, Mr. Hambledon lit her down to the south library, set 2 candles at the writing table, and the fire mended at the grate, and left her at the door with the gravity of a man performing a ceremony he had performed for another hand 31 years. The south library of Popham Court was a long, low room running half the south front, shelved to the corners, smelling of leather, coal, beeswax, and the faint clean salt of old paper. The 3 stone-mullioned windows stood black with the early dark. At the west end, in its own shallow alcove fitted with a brass sconce, hung the mercurial barometer in its mahogany case, the silvered scale showing 29.66 at the candle flame, and beside the alcove, shelf over shelf in their plain-ranged order, stood 140 uniform volumes in marbled boards, each with its year at the spine in the same strong, old-fashioned ink, 1778 at the left of the lowest shelf, and 1818 at the right hand of the highest, where the row stopped and the shelf ran bare to the wall. She took down the volume marked 1818 and carried it to the writing table at the candles. The boards fell open of themselves at the late October, where a paper knife still lay between the leaves. The hand was the hand of the green wafer and of the 2 ruled columns of the August of 1817. Larger now and not so even, but level to the last line. The last entry of the Popham register stood at the head of a fresh ruled day, and read, Thursday 29th October, 1818, morning, 8, glass 2984, rising, therm 39, wind NW, light, white frost at the pasture, the first hard one of the autumn, sky clean to the rim. Afternoon, 2 glass 2988, therm 46, wind NW cloud, none but a little cirrus at the south, very high, the bourne low and clear. Night, 10, glass 2990, steady, therm 33, wind fallen calm, the stars very bright at 10, Jupiter at the meridian, the frost making again, a fair day from end to end, and tomorrow will be fair also. There was nothing under it. The Friday at the head of the next ruling stood bare, and the rest of the book stood bare after it, 26 ruled and empty days to the evening at which she sat. Mr. Erasmus Popham had taken his 10 o'clock reading, banked his library fire, gone up the dark oak staircase past his own painted clouds, and died at the Friday morning before the 8 o'clock glass. In his 82nd year, with his window curtain drawn back, Mrs. Sparsholt said, as he always had it, so that the first light should wake him for the reading. Tomorrow will be fair also. It had been by the household's account. A high blue Friday, still and frosted, the kind of morning his register had been promised to for 41 years. Sophia sat at the writing table a long while with her hand flat at the open page, the way the painted hand at the half landing lay flat at the marbled board. And then she drew the sealed letter from her breast pocket, broke the green wafer at last, and read what the strong, old-fashioned hand had left her. Popham Court, 12th of October, 1818. To my great-niece Sophia, daughter of Walter, whom I never saw. You will read this at the court, in the South Library if my executor has done as I asked, and so you will have seen the shelf, 41 volumes, and the last of them not done. I had meant to even the row at the 50, but the glass has been falling in me since the gale at Michaelmas, whatever the mahogany one in the alcove says, and a man who has read the sky every day for 41 years knows his own weather soonest of anybody. I do not complain of it. I have had a long fair run and a dry house, and the dog is young enough to outlast me, which I arranged on purpose. I am told you will wonder why a man should leave his whole estate to a great niece he never met. The world will say it was the silence of 40 years repenting itself, and the world may say what it likes. The world has never read anything to the foot of the page. So here is the foot of the page. Your grandfather and I parted in 79 over nothing. I have forgot the nothing, which is the way of nothings. And pride kept the gate after the nothing was gone. But I took the Hampshire Chronicle all my days, and your father's name was in it when he was ordained, and in it when he married, and in it when you were born, and in it at the January of 1815 when he died, and at the June of 1815 there began to appear at the month's foot a small table of the Winchester reign, signed S.P., Kingsgate Street, ruled the way my brother used to rule his sums. I cut out the first of them and set it in the end papers of that year's volume, and I have cut out every one of them since, as you will find. 11 years you had kept your book then, if you began it the Lady Day after he gave you the thermometer, which I make no doubt he did. and no doubt you did, for the Pophams were ever weatherwise, and the women of the family the most exact of it. So understand me, child, and then we need say, no more of it forever. I am not leaving Popham Court to a stranger out of remorse. I am leaving the register to the one person of my blood who has been keeping it already, 11 years, 10 miles off, without knowing. The house goes with the register, the land goes with the house, and my one request goes with the whole. And you have read it in the will, and will read it again here, because the old repeat themselves. That the Popham register be not broken, not for the farmers, though they set their hay by it, not for Mr. Howard of Plaistow, though he is welcome to the abstracts, but because a register is a promise made to every day that shall come after, and a family that keeps its promises to the weather, which never thanks anybody, may be trusted to keep them to one another, which is the whole of my religion and the larger part of my politics. The gauge is read at 8, at 2, and at 10. The blank days between my last line and your first are to stand blank forever. Rule them off, date the ruling, and begin. Do not write anything civil about me at the resuming. State the glass, the thermometer, the wind, the sky, and the bourne, and we shall understand one another perfectly, as we have done these 3 years. Your great-uncle, Erasmus Popham. Postscriptum. The dog answers to drift, takes the morning reading with whoever makes it, and is of the settled opinion that the 2 o'clock is beneath him, the cob is Mr. Longstock's, the pearls want wearing, and if any person whatsoever should ever stand in that library and tell you what I promised them by word of mouth, look first in the book. For I never in my life said anything to a man's face that I did not say plainer to the sky the same evening. Sophia Popham read the letter twice, threw at the 2 candles, and laid it flat at the table, and sat with her hands at rest on either side of it for a time that the library clock did not trouble to count for her. The fire settled at the grate, the barometer at the alcove hung silver and patient at its 29.66. Along the bare end of the highest shelf, where the row of 1 40 marbled volumes stopped, there was space, she observed at last, for perhaps a dozen more, and the observing of it was the nearest thing to weeping that the South Library got of her that night, and nearer than anything it got of her for many nights after. At 8 the next morning, Wednesday the 25th of November 1818, the household of Popham Court, which had kept its grief in good order for 26 days, but had not known what it was keeping the house for, heard the south door go, and saw from the kitchen passage the new mistress of the court walk out across the white-frosted lawn to the gauge pillar with the late master's 1818 volume under her arm and the late master's dog at her hem. She drew the measure, found it dry, read the thermometers at the north wall, stood a full half-minute at the wind-vane with her face lifted at the pale clean sky, came into the barometer at the alcove, and then sat down at the South Library writing table, ruled a double line below the 26 blank days, and wrote in her even script with the dog's grey muzzle resting on her shoe under the table. The register stands silent from the 30th of October to the 24th of November, Mr. Erasmus Popham having died at the Friday morning of the 30th of October, in the 82nd year of his age, and the 41st of this register. The blank days stand for him. Resumed by his great-niece at Popham Court, Wednesday 25th November 1818. Morning 8, glass 29.70, rising, therm 31, wind NE, very light, white frost, the gauge dry, the bourne running thin and bright, sky cloudless, a little haze at the valley foot, a fair day, and tomorrow likely fair also. She blotted it and looked at it, and found it answered. He had asked for nothing civil, and there was nothing civil in it. There was only the morning exactly rendered, and the one ruled silence between his hand and hers, and if the last 6 words of the entry were his 6 words and not the form her Winchester journal had ever used, the sky was welcome to make of that whatever the sky should please. The settling of the fortnight that followed was done in the plain order of the house's own habits. Mr. Longstock walked her over the home farm at the Friday and stated the estate at one telling, 620 acres of down, arable and water meadow, the sheep walk at 400 ewes of the Hampshire sort, the rents of the 3 lower farms taken at Lady Day and Michaelmas, the hangers beechwood cut at a 12-year turn, the 3,100 standing at the consoles, the household at 7 indoor, and the farm at 9 out. Reverend Josiah Penton called at the Saturday, a round, soft-voiced scholar of 52, with chalk dust at his cuff and a head full of the parish's 300 souls, drank 1 cup of tea, begged Miss Popham's leave to continue borrowing the late master's philosophical transactions at the accustomed shameless rate, and won the dog's approval and the household's report. Miss Tabitha Sparsholt was found at the 2nd week to have a clear reading voice, a hunger for the circulating library's better shelf, and a hand that could rule a column straight, and began without anything so formal as an appointment to be at the South Library at the evenings. The Hampshire Chronicle of the 28th of November carried 1 paragraph upon the late Mr. Erasmus Popham, his 45,000 readings, save 12, and the passing of Popham Court to a great-niece, a lady of Winchester, and the month's end number carried, at the accustomed foot of the accustomed column, a small ruled table of the November Rain and Glass, signed for the first time not S.P., Kingsgate Street, but S.P., Popham on the Bourne, and the compositors of the Chronicle, who notice everything in a county sooner than anybody, set it without comment, which was Hampshire for a bow. Sir Gerard Brocas's note came up the valley on the first Tuesday of December, on paper with a black border somewhat wider than his aunt's 17-years-old death quite required, in a hand of many flourishes. It presented Sir Gerard's compliments to his young cousin. The relation was not blood, but the word was spread thick, condoled with her upon the loss of an uncle, whose worth, he wrote, no man living had known better or loved longer than the writer, regretted that a painful duty obliged him to wait upon her at the court on the Wednesday following, the 9th of December, at noon, attended by his counsel Mr. Crewe Kern of Lincoln's Inn, upon a matter touching the estate, which he doubted not a few minutes' frank conversation among persons of breeding would compose to the satisfaction of all parties, and remained her affectionate kinsman and servant. Sophia read it twice, laid it in the writing-table drawer, with the late master's paper-knife upon it, as if to keep it from blowing about, and wrote to Mr. Twyford at Winchester that the 9th stood, and that she should be glad of his presence at the South Library at 11. Mr. Twyford's chaise came up the lane at the dusk of the 8th, the solicitor having held it his duty to sleep a night at the court and be at his ground before the ground was wanted. He said at the south porch, shaking the road cold off his black superfine, "Miss Popham, I have read Sir Gerard's affidavit at the registry. A parole trust at law requires very particular proof, the clearest words, the clearest occasion, and a court willing to prefer a dead man's supposed conversation to his living signature. The occasion sworn to is Michaelmas Day at this house. You will, I think, wish to have your own materials at hand." And Sophia, lighting him in, said only, "I shall, Mr. Twyford. They are at hand. They have been at hand, I find, since the 1st of January 1778. That evening she laid out at the long writing-table, in the order she should want them, the 4 principal materials of the morrow's answer, and Mr. Twyford stood at her shoulder at the candles, and read each in its turn, his face entirely without expression, which they that knew him called his courtroom face, and his thumbs at his waistcoat pockets, which they that knew him called his verdict. At the left she laid the register itself, The volume of 1818, open at the 9/20 of September, and weighted flat with the brass rule from the alcove shelf. Beside it, folded back at its place, she laid the Hampshire Chronicle of Saturday, the 3rd of October 1818, which Mr. Hambledon kept filed in the butler's pantry with the methodical piety of 31 years, the file running unbroken to the year of his own arrival. At the centre, she laid a thick vestry book in worn calf, borrowed of Reverend Penton at the Sunday with the rector's eyebrows climbing as he heard the date she wanted, and a slip of Tabitha's straight-ruled paper marking the leaf of the October vestry, and at the right she laid Mr. Longstock's farm book for the year 1818, the steward's brown daily hand smelling of saddle soap and chalk, with a second slip at the 19th of October, and at the page's foot a small printed receipt, pasted in the manner of careful stewards, from Wherwell, Sawyer, of Barton Stacey. Mr. Twyford read the 4 leaves in their order twice over. Then he took off the gold spectacles, polished them at his handkerchief without hurry, set them back at his nose, and said to the heiress of Popham Court, the longest sentence anybody had ever heard him spend on a matter not yet concluded. Miss Popham, I have been 40 years at this trade, and I have seen affidavits answered out of parchment, out of parish registers, out of bank books, and once at the assizes, out of a milestone, but I have never in my 40 years seen a sworn paper answered out of a rain gauge, and I am come to an age, ma'am, at which a man is grateful to be shown a new thing. And he went up to his bed at the east chamber, and slept, the household reported, in the perfect quiet of a man whose case is already won. While at the south library beneath him, the new mistress of the court sat one more half-hour at the open register with the dog's chin at her shoe, reading her great-uncle's Michaelmas in her great-uncle's hand, and then took her 10 o'clock reading at the alcove, and entered the night as the night was. Glass 29:58, falling slow, wind backing southwest, a soft rain beginning at the dark, and ruled the line, and went up. The morning of Wednesday, the 9th of December 1818, came up grey and mild, with the rain gone through before light, the kind of washed still December morning the chalk does better than any country in England, and Popham Court stood at it with its fires lit, its flint face dark with the night's wet, and its south library ready. At 11, Mr. Twyford disposed himself at the writing-table's end with his papers squared. At 1:15 the dog-drift was persuaded, by the offices of Miss Tabitha and half a biscuit, to keep the kitchen during the visit, a measure Mrs. Sparsholt held necessary, the pointer having taken in recent days certain settled views on the subject of strangers' boot-tops. And at noon to the minute, whatever else was to be said of Sir Gerard Brocas, his punctuality was county. Wheels came up the lane, and Mr. Hambledon, at his stateliest, announced into the south library Sir Gerard Brocas, Baronet, and Mr. Crucken. Sir Gerard Brocas was 55, fleshy at the jowl and high in the colour, dressed in mourning of the most fashionable cut, with a primrose waistcoat showing at the opening of it, like spring got into the wrong season, a quizzing glass on a black ribbon at his breast, and a smile of the sort that is applied rather than worn. Mr. Crucken of Lincoln's Inn was his opposite in every article, 60, dry, narrow, grey as a heron, in black that had outlasted fashions without noticing them, with a green portfolio under his arm and sharp grey eyes that took the whole room at one level pass. The heiress, the solicitor, the writing-table, the 4 leaves squared upon it, and gave back nothing at all. "My dear cousin," said Sir Gerard at the threshold, advancing with both hands a little open, as a man advances upon property. "My dear Miss Popham, forgive the warmth of an old man, but the look of you, the very look of the Pophams, my poor aunt would have wept." Sophia said only, "Sir Gerard, Mr. Crucken, pray be seated. Mr. Twyford of Winchester, my late great-uncle's man of business and executor, is present, as is the custom in such matters." Sir Gerard's smile tightened a perceptible half-degree at the gold spectacles already level at the table's end, but he took the wing-chair at the hearth with a creak of good tailoring, disposed the primrose waistcoat, and let the quizzing-glass fall to the length of its ribbon. Mr. Crewkerne took the upright chair at his right, set the green portfolio across his knees, and folded his hands upon it. For a moment there was no sound in the south library but the small, soft fall of a coal at the grate, and, very far off through the December stillness, the cathedral bell distance of a single waggon coming up the valley lane. Then Sir Gerard cleared his throat and began. "Cousin, I shall call you cousin. The heart has its own table of kindred. What I have to say is painful to me. Painful, I say, because it touches the wishes of a man I revered, and because it must seem, to a young lady so newly and so creditably established, unwelcome. I beg you to believe that no part of my errand is directed against yourself. Had my uncle's true intentions been carried into effect, I should this day be standing your friend, your trustee, I may say your guardian, in this very room, and you should be sitting there, precisely as you sit now, secure, respected, and provided for. It is the irony of our situation, my dear cousin, that I am come to claim nothing that would not have left you exactly as comfortable as I find you." He let that hang a moment at the warm air, and turned the quizzing-glass once at its ribbon. "You are aware, Mr. Twyford will have told you, that I waited upon my uncle at this house on Michaelmas Day last, the 29th of September. I shall not forget the date. A man does not forget the last sight of a face he had known and honoured 40 years. I had driven over from Sherfield upon matters of family business. The Brocas memorials at the Sherfield church wanted my uncle's opinion, my aunt's grave being there, and I found him, I rejoice to say it even now, in excellent spirits and the fullest possession of his admirable faculties. We dined at 4, as his unalterable custom was, and after dinner, the afternoon being remarkably fine, one of those soft, golden Michaelmas afternoons, cousin, that an old man treasures, the very plate and seal of the season, my uncle would have his coat and stick, and we walked out upon the south terrace together, the whole length of it, and back, and the whole length again, his hand at my arm, and at the west end of the terrace, where the great cedar stands, you will know the tree, cousin, the glory of the court. My aunt sat under it the summer she was a bride. At the west end, I say, we took our seat together upon the bench beneath the cedar, in the shade of it, and the low sun coming gold through the boughs, and there my uncle opened to me, with a solemnity I shall carry to my grave, the whole of his testamentary mind." Sir Gerard drew breath, and his voice dropped into the register of recitation, of a thing conned and carried. "He said to me, I give you his words, cousin, as nearly as a man may who has turned them over every night since. He said, 'Gerard, you are my Arabella's nephew, and the nearest thing to a son this house has had. A woman's blood is a thin claim at law, but it is a thick one at the fireside. The girl at Winchester is a worthy creature, my brother's stock, and she shall never want. 200 a year shall make her the first schoolmistress in the county. But land must go to a man that can hold it, and the court must go with my Arabella's blood, and I shall not trouble Twyford to be altering parchment at my time of life. The word of a Popham under his own cedar is older law than anything in Lincoln's Inn. The estate is to be yours, Gerard, at my death, you charging yourself with the girl's 200. And there is my hand on it." And he gave me his hand, cousin, that dry old hand I had known 40 years, under that tree, in that gold light, 5 weeks before they carried him past it. And I drove home to Sherfield through the dusk, with my heart too full for supper, and I sat down the same evening in my library, while every syllable stood fresh, and I made a memorandum of the whole conversation, dated and signed, which paper, sworn before a magistrate, lies at the registry at Winchester, and a copy of which Mr. Crewkerne holds at this moment at his knee. That, Miss Popham, is the whole of my unhappy errand. The law may read wills, but you and I, cousin, are reading a conscience, and I have too good an opinion of the Popham blood in you to believe you will sit easy at a hearth, your uncle's own word, his hand, and his cedar tree assigned to another. Mr. Crewkerne, at the word, drew from the green portfolio a folded paper and laid it without comment at the edge of the writing table, where Mr. Twyford, with equal absence of comment, drew it the remaining distance with one finger, opened it, and read it through at his own pace, while the fire ticked. It was as Sir Gerard had stated it, a memorandum in a flourished hand, headed Sherfield Park, Michaelmas night, 1818, rehearsing the interview, the dinner at 4, the fine golden afternoon, the walk upon the terrace the whole length and back, and the whole length again, the seat taken beneath the great cedar at the west end, the declaration, the hand given, signed Gerard Brocas, and below the signature, in a clerk's hand, the jurat of its swearing at Winchester, the 6th of November, 1818. Sophia Popham had heard the recitation through, without once moving in her chair, her hands at rest in her lap, in the level Hampshire fashion her mother's people had kept all their days, her eyes not on Sir Gerard, but on the December light at the middle window, where the washed sky stood pale and even over the down. When Mr. Twyford had laid the memorandum flat and squared it with the table's edge, she turned her face at last to the wing-chair. And anyone watching closely, Mr. Crewkerne was watching closely, would have said that the young woman's composure was not the composure of a defendant at all, but of an examiner who has read the paper beforehand and found one figure carried wrong. "Thank you, Sir Gerard," she said. "You tell it very exactly. The dinner at 4, the walk after dinner, the whole length of the terrace and back, and the whole length again, the seat beneath the great cedar at the west end, the low sun coming gold through the boughs, on Michaelmas Day, the 29th of September of this present year." "To the day, cousin," said Sir Gerard, warm and grave. "To the hour. An old man's memory holds the great moments of his life, as a church holds its plate." "Yes," said Sophia. "I have found that memory and plate are kept much alike. Both shine, and both are counted seldom. Sir Gerard, before Mr. Twyford answers your paper at law, I should like, with your leave, to read you a page of a book. It is a book that was written in this room. Part of it was written, I believe, at the very hour your memorandum was written at Sherfield." She rose, and brought the volume of 1818 from the left of the writing table, open at its weighted place, and stood with it at the middle window, where the light was. "My great-uncle, as I think you know better than most, Sir Gerard, kept a meteorological register at this house. He began it on the 1st of January 1778, and he wrote it 3 times in every day for 41 years. At 8 in the morning, at 2 in the afternoon, and at 10 at night, 45,000 readings, wanting 12. He missed no day for travel, for none was taken, none for sickness, for he had none till the last, none for weather was the whole undertaking. The register does not remember Sir Gerard. The register was written while the day itself stood at the window. This is the page for Michaelmas Day, the 29th of September 1818, in his own hand. With Mr. Crewkerne's permission, I shall read the whole of it." Mr. Crewkerne inclined his narrow grey head the smallest practicable distance. Sir Gerard had gone very still in the wing-chair, and the applied smile stood at his face unattended, like a lamp burning at noon. Sophia read, in her level schoolroom voice, neither slow nor fast, the voice of one who has read aloud to rows of children, matter that must be got exactly right the first time. Tuesday, 29th September, 1818, Michaelmas Day, morning, 8, glass 29:12, fallen 4/10 in the night, falling still, and the fall quickening, therm, 57, close and unseasonable. Wind S, backing SW, freshening in gusts. Sky a high milk haze thickening from the southwest. The sun pale at 9 and gone by 10. Cirrus drawn out in long hard streamers before the haze, the surest of all the storm's outriders. The rooks left the hangar at the forenoon altogether, which they do not do for nothing. Sent the boy down at noon to bid Longstock see to the great barn doors and the fold hurdles, and bid the rectory mind the north aisle. The lead there being loose since August, this will be a gale by night, and no common one. Afternoon, 2 glass to 28:71. I have not seen the mercury so low at the 2 o'clock since the Christmas storm of 1809. Wind SW by S, a whole gale and rising. Rain driving level along the terrace, the gauge filling fast. No man could stand at the west end to read the vein, and I read the smoke of the lower hamlet instead, laid flat as a hedge. The bourne, that was dry at its head these 2 months, came down brown at 1 o'clock, bank to bank in the lower meadow within the hour. The house groans at the south front like a ship. Dined at 4 alone, off a tray, at this table, the dining room shutters being up. No fire would stay lit at that chimney. 4 o'clock, written at once. The great cedar at the west end of the terrace is down. It went at one gust, across both urns, the noise of it under the gale's noise like a door shut in another room. 60 years of shade gone between 2 strokes of the library clock. No soul was beneath it, Laus Deo. No soul has crossed that terrace this day, nor could. I had the south door chained at 2, and Hambledon has the only key of it in his pantry. I sat at this window, and watched my father's tree go down, and I find I had rather have lost the roof. Night, 10 glass from 28:64 at the lowest, now 28:79 and rising. The worst is gone east. Wind WSW, hard squalls but breaking. The gauge at the night reading, 1 inch and 7/10 since morning, the greatest fall of any day of this register since the 9th of October, 1799. Rain still at the windows. The night as black as the inside of a boot. No star, no rick fire, nothing at the valley but the bourne roaring. The Michaelmas gale of 1818 will be remembered in this country, and tomorrow we shall count what it has cost us. No fair thing about this day from end to end, and tomorrow will be foul also. Sophia lowered the book, but did not close it. That is the day, Sir Gerard, she said, on which your memorandum dines with my great-uncle at 4, at a table he records he did not lay, and walks with him after dinner the whole length of the south terrace and back, and the whole length again. Across a terrace he records no soul could cross. Behind a door he records he had chained at 2 o'clock, and sits with him in the gold of the low sun, under the shade of a cedar, which, at the hour your paper has the 2 of you beneath its boughs, was already lying across both urns with its roots at the sky. Your golden Michaelmas afternoon, Sir Gerard, fell 1 inch and 7/10 of rain. It was the foulest day at this house in 19 years. It is the only day of the whole of that September that no man in Hampshire who lived it could mistake for fair, and the only one your memorandum could not afford to have chosen. There was a silence at the South Library of a quality that the room had perhaps not held before in its 117 years. The fire ticked at it. The long case clock at the hall let fall its single half-hour note far away, like something dropped on carpet. Sir Gerard Brocas's high colour had gone higher, and then had gone out altogether, leaving the fleshy face the colour of the primrose waistcoat. He looked at the register in the heiress's hands, and at Mr. Twyford's courtroom face, and at his own counsel, and Mr. Crewkerne was not looking back at him. Mr. Crewkern, with the smallest, driest, most terrible professional attention, was looking at the open volume, and his sharp grey eyes were running the ruled lines of it, the 41 years of habit at the spines along the alcove shelf, the columns, the dates, the unbroken, unhesitating, marching regularity of it. And the green portfolio had shut upon his knees, without his appearing to notice that his own hands had shut it. Sir Gerard rallied. Men of his cut always rally once. It is the second blow they have no arrangement for. He laughed, a small dry laugh that did not carry past the hearth-rug, and spread his plump hands. "Cousin, cousin, you read most charmingly, and I am as great an admirer of my uncle's industry as any man living. But come, we are grown people. An old gentleman of 81 sits at his window in a storm, alone, his fancy full of falling trees, and writes, what? Weather, cousin. Ink and weather. And against the poetry of his barometer, you would set aside the sworn recollection of a baronet of this county, made the same night, of a conversation at which the register, however admirable, was not present. I may have erred in a date, Michaelmas, the eve of Michaelmas the Monday before, what is a day among kinsmen? The substance of the trust, the words, the hand given under the cedar. These are what signify, and these I have sworn to, and these stand. The substance is the cedar, Sir Gerard, said Sophia, in the same level voice. Your paper does not say near Michaelmas. It says Michaelmas Day, and dinner at 4, and the terrace twice walked, and the seat taken beneath the tree, and the low sun gold through its boughs. You have sworn to the furniture of the day very particularly, and the furniture is what convicts the day. But since you now offer me the Monday before, or the eve, or some other afternoon of that season, choose any day you please, sir, of that whole September, and I shall read it to you, and we shall see whether the cedar can be sat under on it. I ought in fairness to tell you, before you choose, that from the 14th of September the register gives rain or wind at every afternoon save 4, that on 2 of the 4 my great-uncle records himself at Andover, at the bank, and at the wool-staplers, with the gig ordered at 9 and the house shut till evening, that the 3rd is the Sunday, on which day, as the Reverend Penton will testify, he never in 41 years received any visitor whatsoever, the 10 o'clock reading being in his own phrase the only company the Sabbath required, and that the 4th is the 28th, the Michaelmas Eve you have just offered me, on which the entry at 2 o'clock records the first of the hays, and his afternoon spent, by name and by errand, with Mr. Longstock at the great barn, seeing the doors double-pinned against what the glass was promising. The register, Sir Gerard, does not leave a gentleman anywhere at all to have stood in this garden that fortnight, except in the rain. She set the register down at the writing-table, open, and took up in its place the folded newspaper. But you need not rest upon ink and weather, Sir Gerard, nor upon poetry. The Hampshire Chronicle of Saturday the 3rd of October. She opened it at the marked column and turned it that the wing-chair might see the print of it, gives half a column to the great Michaelmas Gale. The Southampton mail stopped at the flooded ford below Whitchurch. The elms down at the Andover turnpike counted at 40. The hoys driven ashore at the Itchen, and one line I shall read as it stands. At Popham, the great cedar at the court, the landmark of the upper bourne these 60 years, was laid flat at the height of the storm. My great-uncle's poetry, sir, was taken up by the compositors of Winchester within the week, and 4,000 subscribers had the cedar down before October was 5 days old. Did no copy of the Chronicle come that week to Sherfield Park? She laid the newspaper by, and drew the vestry book to the table's edge. The vestry of St. Swithin's of Popham on the Bourne met on Monday the 5th of October. The rector in the chair, to view the hurt done the church by the same Gale. The minute is here, in the parish clerk's hand. the lead of the north aisle stripped back, as the entry has it, like the lid of his lordship's snuff-box. 3 trees down at the churchyard wall, the charge of relaying the lead and resetting the stone tiles set out at £6 8 shillings and 4 pence, and ordered to be paid. And the whole heading written plain at the top of the leaf, after the great gale of Michaelmas Day. A parish, Sir Gerard, may forget a sermon by Tuesday, but it does not forget what it has paid £6 8 and 4 pence to mend. The sum is in the churchwarden's account this day, and the Reverend Penton and both churchwardens are within a half-mile of this chair. She drew the farm book last, and turned it to the pasted receipt with one finger at the slip of ruled paper. And the cedar itself, sir, since your memorandum sat us both beneath it. Mr. Longstock's book, the 19th of October, to Wherewell Sawyer, of Barton Stacey, for the sawing and carting of the great cedar blown down at the Michaelmas gale, 14 shillings, the timber sold on at £2.12, the receipt signed at the foot in the sawyer's own hand, and pasted at the leaf. The bench you have sworn you sat upon went to Barton Stacey on a timber waggon 3 weeks before my great-uncle died, Sir Gerard, and the stump it left is 11 paces from that window, under the frost, where it will be found this afternoon by any gentleman who cares to walk out and measure his recollection against it. The tree is the substance of your trust, sir. The tree is also the readiest witness against it that ever I heard of, for it is the only witness in this cause that can be viewed from the room in which the cause is heard. Nobody went to the window. Everybody in the south library looked at it, the pale washed light, the line of the terrace balustrade, the raw broad disk of new-sawn wood standing low at the west end where 60 years of shade had stood, and the looking was itself the view. Mr. Crewkerne rose. He rose in the manner of a man who has, at some private moment in the foregoing quarter-hour, ceased to be of counsel in a cause, and become merely a connoisseur of its remains. And he addressed not his client, but Mr. Twyford, in a voice as dry as a deed-box. Mr. Twyford, I am obliged to you, and to Miss Popham, for a morning I shall mention to nobody, and remember at every Michaelmas of my life. I shall advise my client, in the carriage, of the precise weight a court of equity will give to a sworn parole declaration which the declarant's own contemporaneous record, corroborated by the public prints, the vestry of the parish, the churchwarden's accounts, a sawyer's receipt, and a stump, convicts of impossibility in every material circumstance, the advice will be short. He took up the green portfolio and bowed to Sophia with a precision that had something in it, very far down, of the ceremonial sword. Madame, my profession sees affidavits answered by affidavits, which is tedious. You have answered one with a tree. I am beaten, ma'am, and I find I bear it better than I expected. Sir Gerard Brocas got to his feet by stages, like a man rising through deep water, the primrose waistcoat moving at a quick, shallow breath. At the last, he attempted the smile again, and the apparatus of it would not entirely come, and what arrived at his face instead was the dull, congested look of a man who has been shown, in company, the inside of his own conscience, and finds the furniture poorer than he had been telling himself these many years. He said thickly that he should not trouble his cousin further at present, that a man's recollection might be honest, and yet the sentence did not finish. Mr. Crewkerne was holding the door. At the threshold, Sir Gerard turned, and for one moment the thickness left his voice, and something older and almost honest stood in it. He gave me the miniature then, by the will, the Inglehart, my aunt's face, trusting he will value it at its true worth. He looked at the floor. He knew the worth I had set on the rest, you see. He always read a man best at his window. And Sir Gerard Brocas went out of the south library of Popham Court, behind his counsel, and down the stone hall, and out at the chained and unchained south door, past the butler's perfect bow, and his wheels went down the valley lane in the washed December light, past the stump at the west end of the terrace, which did not trouble to watch him go. Mr. Twyford stayed to a plain dinner and the 2 o'clock reading, which he requested leave to witness, standing at a respectful distance from the gauge pillar, with his hat off, as at a small church. The paper was withdrawn at the registry at Winchester on the Friday, with costs paid and nothing further said. Mr. Twyford's letter announcing it added only that Mr. Crewkerne had returned to London the same evening, and had been heard to decline, at the Star Inn Ordinary, a fellow traveller's opinion that the season had been a mild one, on the ground that he was no longer to be drawn on weather by any man living. And at the South Library at the 10 o'clock reading of that Friday night, Sophia Popham, having entered the glass and the wind and the hard, bright winter stars, sat a moment with the pen at rest, and then added at the line's end, in her even script, the only comment the register ever got from her on the whole matter of Sir Gerard Brocas: "The estate quiet, tomorrow will be fair." December settled at the valley like the dog at the hearth. The frosts came white and regular. The burn ran full at the meadow. The household, which had held its breath, without knowing it from the day the black-bordered note had come up the lane, let it out by inches, and the court began, in the small ways a house shows it, to be glad. Mrs. Sparsholt was heard singing at the still room, very low, an air of the last century. Mr. Hambledon decanted the '98 port for the Sunday dinner without being asked, observing to the kitchen that the occasion would excuse it to the late master who had bought it. Tabitha ruled fresh columns in a fresh-bought book, having appointed herself, with her mistress's leave, copyist of the Register's monthly abstract. And at the Christmas, the £25 of the will went out in bread and coals from the south porch in the level Hampshire fashion the Popham family had kept all their days, Sophia at the porch, with Mrs. Sparsholt at the lists, the parish coming up the lane in its Sunday best, through a small dry snow, and Drift reviewing every sack and every child with the grave, incorruptible attention of a customs house officer who can be bribed by absolutely anyone. On the Friday morning of the 1st of January 1819, the volume marked 1818 was closed, ruled off, and carried up to its place at the right hand of the highest shelf, and a new volume in the same marbled boards. Tabitha had matched them at the Andover stationer's with the fierce exactness of 19, was opened at the writing table, and headed in Sophia's even script, "The Popham Register, Voloshisig kept at Popham Court, begun the 1st of January 1819, being the 42nd year of the Register and the first of its keeping by S.P. The morning gave her white frost, a still air, the glass at 30:02 and steady, and a sky of the high-washed blue that the chalk keeps for the turn of the year. And she entered it all, and at the foot, because the day was the day it was, she permitted the Register one sentence of the sort her great-uncle had permitted it, perhaps a dozen times in 41 years. The new year comes in fair. The Register goes on. January went in the learning of the estate's winter. The fold moved up the down at Mr. Longstock's elbow, the rents of the lower farms taken at the steward's room table, with Mr. Twyford's clerk at her right hand, the first time and nobody at it the second, the heiress having been found, to the clerk's visible relief, to check sums faster than he could. The beechwood of the hanger walked, and the 12-year fellings marked, the household's books taken over from Mrs. Sparsholt at that lady's own insistence, audited at one long evening, and handed back with 1 shilling and 4 of 40 years' honest puzzlement, resolved at last between them, to the satisfaction of both parties and the particular glory of the still room. The evenings went at the South Library, Tabitha at the abstract book, or reading aloud from the circulating library's better shelf, while her mistress ruled the month's tables. The dog at the hearth, dreaming at his old man's dreams, the 10 o'clock reading taken at the candle with the frost flowering at the panes. And on the Saturday mornings, at the parish schoolroom at the churchyard gate, began the class that the upper bourne came in time to call, with the small pride of small places, the Cloud School. It had begun as nothing at all. The rector's catechism class let out early one bright cold Saturday. A knot of children at the churchyard wall, watching the new mistress of the court stand at the lane with her face lifted at the sky, and one of them, Jem the sexton's boy, a person of 9 with an insatiable appetite for the names of things, asking her with the directness of the chalk what she was looking at. She had answered him exactly as she answered everybody. By the third Saturday there were 11 of them at the schoolroom benches with their slates, learning Mr. Howard's Latin as a game, Cirrus the curl, Cumulus the heap, Stratus the blanket, Nimbus the rain-bringer. How the high mare's tails ride out 2 days before a southerly gale. Why the down smoke lies flat before rain and stands straight before frost. How to read the rooks and the swallows and the bourne. The rector looked in at the 4th Saturday and stayed to the end, and walked back up the lane to the rectory afterwards very thoughtful, and preached at the next morning to a congregation that included 11 children sitting suspiciously upright upon the heavens, declaring the glory of God and the firmament showing his handiwork. And at the church door, shaking hands, he said to the lady of the court that he had been the parish's schoolmaster in all weathers for 16 years, and had that week been shown the weather itself made a school, and begged she would never give the Saturdays up while she lived at the bourne. At the Candlemas, Tuesday the 2nd of February 1819, the bourne, which had run thin since the January frosts, came down full from the springs at the upper combe, brimming bank to bank at the lower meadow, bright over the chalk gravel in the level winter light, and the register noted it as the register had noted it at 36 of the last 40 years, the springs of the chalk keeping the church's calendar more nearly than the church suspected. Candlemas. The bourne came down at the forenoon, full and clear. Winter holds, but the year has turned at the root. Little Patience Overton's aunt, the Winchester dressmaker, had a married sister at the lower hamlet, and at the half-quarter holiday, Patience herself appeared at the court in the carrier's cart, by arrangement of the 2 households, and to the open triumph of the Cloud School, whose ranks she joined at the Saturday with the air of a bishop visiting a rural deanery, she having read the glass at Kingsgate Street before any of them was born, as she gave them to understand. It was at the January's end, at the ruling of the first monthly abstract, that Sophia had written at last to London. The letter was short. It named the register, its length, its keeping, and its instruments. Enclosed the January abstract, ruled in Tabitha's copy, and asked whether the tables of an inland chalk valley, kept 41 years at the same house with the same glass, might be of use to the author of the essay on the modifications of clouds, whose nomenclature the register had carried since the year 1803. The answer came up the valley 12 days later, 3 sheets in a small upright merchant's hand, and it began in a fashion that made Tabitha, who had carried it in, linger shamelessly at the library door. Esteemed friend, for so I shall address thee, the register thou describest being a friendship of 41 years standing with the truth, and I claim the connection. Thy letter and thy January table have been read at this desk 3 times, which is twice more than I allow the Royal Society's own communications. Mr. Luke Howard of Plaistow, of the Society of Friends, chemist of the Ascesian, begged leave to say that he had known of the Popham register these many years by repute, and once by correspondence, the late keeper having sent him, at the publishing of the Cloud Essay, 2 sheets of close observation upon the wave cloud of the chalk downs which he had used with acknowledgment, that the work now preparing at his desk upon the climate of London and the south of England wanted exactly what Popham Court possessed, an inland register of great length kept with a sea-coast exactness, that he begged the monthly abstracts as a standing favour, and the loan, at the register's convenience, and under whatever guard of carriage it pleased to name, of the volumes for 1794 and 1799 and 1809, the great storm years, and that he remained, with the plain friend's subscription that wears better than flourishes, her assured friend. At the letter's foot, after the signature, stood a postscriptum that Sophia read several times. Thou sayest the register must not be broken, and I perceive thou hast had this of thy predecessor as a charge. Permit an old observer one remark. A charge of that kind is commonly thought to bind the keeper to the book. It is my experience that it binds the book to the keeper, which is a kindlier arrangement, and I think thy great-uncle knew it. The abstracts went up to London, thereafter at every month's turn, with the carrier to Andover and the mail thence, wrapped in oiled paper and corded in the fashion Mr. Hambledon held proper for documents of state, and the Hampshire Chronicle's small rule table at the month's foot continued without remark, and the register's fame, which had been a county matter for a generation, began very quietly to travel beyond the county, a fact the upper bourne learned chiefly through the postman, and discussed at the smithy, and decided, after mature deliberation, to take entirely as its own credit. The second discovery of that winter was not made all at once, and was not, in the end, one discovery at all, but 41 of them, shelved in plain sight along the alcove wall. It began at the February's first wet week, when the down was a grey sponge and the afternoons were short, and Sophia took down at last the volume for 1815, which she had been leaving on the shelf with a deliberateness she had not examined. She had gone to it for the storm tables Mr. Howard wanted. She found, at the entry for Tuesday the 24th of January 1815, the day of the hard frost at Winchester, the day half her life had hinged upon, the following, in the strong hand at its usual level pace: morning, 8 glass 30:1, high and steady, therm, 19, the hardest frost of this winter. Wind N, a breath only, rime thick on every twig of the hanger, and the valley below, all one white smoke. My nephew Walter Popham, curate of Compton, died this morning at Winchester of the inflammation of the lungs in his 49th year. The Chronicle shall tell me on Saturday what the bell at Compton is telling the Itchen Valley now. He was 9 years old when I saw him last, at his father's gate, and he is dead at 49, and the two figures sit at this line like a sum I have set myself every day for 40 years and never once attempted. His daughter keeps the school at Kingsgate Street. She is 23. The frost will hold the week. I have written nothing to Winchester. What should the writing of one letter cost a man who has written the sky 3 times a day since 78? I do not know. I have never known. That is the whole of the entry, and the rest of the page may stand blank for shame. And the rest of that page did stand blank, the only afternoon and night readings missing from the body of the register in 41 years. The columns ruled and empty, the silence kept once, deliberately, for a death 10 miles off, until the next morning's 8 o'clock resumed at the accustomed level, as the man himself had resumed and gone on. After that, she read the volumes as what they were. The weather stood in every line of them, exact to the 10th of an inch for 4 decades, the great frosts and the green Christmases, the comet summer of 1811, the cold harvests of the war years marching through the tables like a slow tide, but at the margins, at the rate of perhaps 4 lines in a year, in entries that began as weather and ended as a man, the register kept the other ledger her great-uncle had never owned to keeping. At the 14th of June 1789. Sultry. Thunder at the evening over the Winchester road. My brother's son Walter married this day, the Chronicle says, to Miss Rosamond Uverdale of Wickham. The thunder came to nothing here. I drank their healths alone at this table in the 83 port, and the register may make of that what it likes. At the 12th of March, 1792. Rain at morning, fair at evening, a soft, growing day, the first of the spring. A daughter born at Compton Parsonage on this day, the Chronicle of Saturday says, to the Reverend Walter Popham, christened Sophia, for her grandmother. The rooks began the high elms this morning, 11 days early, a good year coming, by every sign of it. At the 30th of October, 1806. A grey gentle day, mild for the season, the hanger gold to the foot. Mrs. Rosamond Popham died at Compton on the Monday, the paper says, of a decline. The girl is 14. I had the gig at the door at the noon, and the horse stood at it till the 2 o'clock reading, and was taken back to the stable, not having been anywhere. The glass steady at 29.91. A man may keep a register 31 years, it appears, and still not know which way his own weather will fall out before noon. She found her own life ticked through the margins like the bourne through the meadow. The Lady Day of 1807. My great-niece will begin a journal this year, or I am no judge of blood. Walter had the thermometer of our father, and a man does not keep such a thing 15 years to leave it in a drawer. The June of 1815, at the first printed table over the letters SP, one line only. So, it is begun. With the cutting pasted at the page foot, the first of 41 cuttings she traced thereafter through the end papers of 4 volumes, every month of her printed Winchester figures from the 1st to the October of 1818, each clipped square and dated, and the last of them pasted 10 days before the will was made, and at the end papers of the final volume, below the last cutting, the strong hand had ruled a small neat sum, of the kind set at the foot of an audited account, her 11 years of mournings at one column, his 41 at the other, and beneath them, carried to a single line, the figure of the 2 registers added together. 52 years. The chalk has been watched, one way and another, since before the king was mad. Let it be watched still. E.P. Octor Seat, 1818. It was Tabitha who found the letters of Mr. Gilbert White in the long garret over the east wing at the spring cleaning, framed in plain oak and wrapped against the dust in a Holland sheet. 2 letters only of 1784 and 1788 from the curate of Selborne to a youngish gentleman of the Bourne Valley, who had evidently sent him close notes upon the swifts of the chalk and the behaviour of the down-country mists. They were of the matter natural to 2 such men, the swifts going, the chafer years, the leaf fall. But at the second letter's close, the old parson of Selborne had written a sentence that Sophia had carried down from the garret and hung at the south library alcove beside the barometer, where the morning light found it. Men laugh at us, my good sir, for setting down what every man may see for nothing, but the laughers see nothing twice, and we have each day made fast to paper before it could be lost, and I am persuaded that the watching of a parish, faithfully continued, is worth the touring of a continent, and that no day faithfully recorded was ever wholly a bad one. So the winter's discovery, when Sophia came to rule it off and carry it forward as the abstracts were ruled and carried, stood thus, that the silence of 40 years had never for 1 week of them been a silence at all, that the family the world supposed sundered had been, on one side at least, watched over at the rate of 3 readings a day with the fidelity of a coastlight which asks no thanks and expects no ship to wave, and that she had been left Popham Court not by a stranger repenting, but by the most constant correspondent she had ever possessed, who had simply, in the Popham fashion, conducted his whole side of the correspondence to the sky, and trusted that one day a person of his own blood would come at last into the South Library and take down the volumes and read his 40 years of letters, where he had filed them between the wind and the glass. She wrote nothing of this in the register, which had had it all at first hand, but at the alcove, at the 10 o'clock reading of the last night of February, she stood a moment with the candle before the 1 and 40 spines, and the 2 framed letters, and the patient silver face of the carry glass, and said aloud, at the empty room, in the level voice of her schoolroom, "Good night, then, all of you." And the register went on. March went out like the proverb, all lamb at the last week of it, the downturning that young improbable green that lasts a fortnight, and is the whole reason the chalk keeps shepherds. And at the quarter's turn, Sophia put off the unrelieved black, the 5 months being past, and Mrs. Sparsholt and the Winchester dressmaker's sister, having between them gently insisted, and went into half-mourning, dove-grey with a lavender sprig, in which the household privately considered that the court had never been better worth looking at since the late Mrs. Arabella was a bride, though nobody said so above stairs. The register marked the spring at its own calendar, the first chiff-chaff at the hanger at the 27th of March, 4 days early, the swallows at the great barn at the 14th of April, the bourne beginning to slacken at the meadow as the springs drew down, the first cuckoo heard at the combe on the 17th, and the cloud school out of all government for the rest of the lesson. The register noted, the Saturday class having by then earned the right of an occasional appearance in the visible history of the chalk. Easter fell that year on the 11th of April, and the morning of it came up exactly as the register's 3 generations of Easters said. The Bourne Valley does its duty by the feast when it chooses. A soft, bright southwest morning, the high white cumulus going over slow and seldom, the churchyard yews black-green against the young down, the bells of St. Swithin's. There are but 3, and one of them is cracked, and the parish would not part with the cracked one for a peal of 12, swinging the valley into the morning service. The whole Bourne came, the farms, the hamlets, the cloud school scrubbed pink and unrecognizable, the court's household in its Sunday ranks, and the lady of the court in dove-grey at the Popham pew, where the morning sun, coming through the south windows of plain Georgian glass, laid a pale gold bar across the prayer book her mother had owned before her. It was at the south porch, at the going out, in the loitering bright churchyard half-hour that is the parish's true parliament, that the Reverend Josiah Penton, with the particular shine he wore when 2 of his favourite books had come off the same shelf together, presented to Miss Popham of Popham Court, Sir Anselm de Moray, 6th Baronet of de Moray Court above the Dever, 6 miles east across the chalk, lay patron, as she would know, of the Popham living, Fellow of the Royal Society these 9 years, and, the rector added with the gravity he kept for his best jokes, the only landowner in Hampshire who had ever returned a borrowed volume of the Philosophical Transactions without being dunned for it. Sir Anselm de Moray was 1 and 40, tall, spare in the saddle-kept fashion of a man whose acres are chalk, and whose habit is the down, dark brown hair lightly silvered at the temples, a weathered fair face, and calm grey eyes with the trick. Sophia marked it at the first half-minute, having stood 11 years at her own instruments, of going up, between sentences, to the rim of the sky, not vaguely as an idler's do, but at particular quarters, as a man checks particular instruments. He bowed at the rector's presenting, unhurried, his hat already in his hand, and said that he was glad at last to be made known to Miss Popham, and had 2 confessions to discharge at the first meeting, lest they stand at his account and gather interest. The first, he said, was that he had known of her before the county did. At the parish school inspection of last September, the rector would remember it. It had rained. He had been shown, at Mr. Penton's study, by way of the parish's one boast, a single leaf of the Popham Register, borrowed of the late Mr. Popham for the purpose with all the formality of a state loan. The leaf of the great January frost of 1814. He had, he said, read 40 years of the Philosophical Transactions, and had never seen the day's sky better made, fast to paper. He had said so then, to the rector, in the rain. He was glad to say it now, in better weather, to the register's keeper. The second confession was the worse of the two. He had, since the January of this year, been a subscriber. The word was chosen and delivered with the deliberate care of a man laying down a card he knows to be good, to a certain small ruled table at the foot of the month's end column of the Hampshire Chronicle, had clipped the February number and carried it to London in his pocketbook to the Royal Society's spring meetings, and had there had the honour of hearing Mr. Luke Howard himself, at the close of a paper upon the climate of the South, cite to the fellows in attendance the Popham Register of Hampshire, 41 years unbroken at the same house, and now continued, the Society will be glad to learn, at the same exactness, by the late keeper's great niece. He had it on him still, he said, the clipped February table. A man did not surrender lightly the only document in his pocketbook that the Royal Society had heard praised aloud. The churchyard parliament, which had been attending to this exchange with the frank, comprehensive ears of the chalk, would dine on it for a week. Sophia Popham, at her plain Hampshire gravity in the dove grey, with the shagreen thermometer case at its black cord in her gloved hand, met the calm grey eyes at the porch with the level look of the schoolroom and the gauge pillar, and said that Sir Anselm was very good, that the register's exactness was none of hers, she having inherited the method entire, as he saw, with the house and the dog, and that the keeping of it she should continue at her great-uncle's settled wish, the register being, as he had written, a promise made to every day that should come after. "Then I shall presume to wish the days many, ma'am," said Sir Anselm de Moray, and bowed, and did not outstay the sentence, which Sophia, who had been bowed at considerably since November, noted as the rarest manners she had met with at any porch. At his side, through all of this, very straight in a blue pelisse, with cowslips in her bonnet and her father's grey eyes in a 9-year-old face, stood Miss Dorothea Damery, who had been presented in form and had executed her curtsy with the concentration of artillery practice, and who now, at the visit's last moment, gathered her courage as visibly as a wave gathers, and asked Miss Popham, all in one breath, whether it was true that there was a brook above Miss Popham's meadow that was alive in winter and dead in summer, and whether a person could be shown it. Her father said, "Dorothea," in the mild, automatic tone fathers keep for the word. Sophia said gravely that it was true, that the brook was called a Winterbourne, and was at this season just beginning to die for the summer, which it did slowly, from the head down, like a very old gentleman who means to be talked about, and that if Sir Anselm should ever have occasion to call at Popham Court, the bourne should certainly be shown to anyone in his carriage who cared for such things. Miss Dorothea de Moray looked up at her father with an expression that the whole churchyard could read at 30 paces, and the 6th baronet, settling his hat, remarked to the rector with great seriousness that he believed he should be able to discover an occasion, the chalk being, as Mr. Penton knew, full of them at this season. And so it stood that on the Saturday morning of the 1st of May, 1819, in the level Hampshire fashion in which all things came up that valley, the Damery carriage came up the lane to the south porch of Popham Court at 11, and the register, at the 2 o'clock reading of that day, in the space where the face of the sky is recorded, noted high fair weather cumulus, a light west wind, the first swifts screaming at the church tower, and then, at the line's end, in the even script, the only entry of its kind in 42 volumes. Callers at the court this forenoon, Sir A.D. of Demory, and Miss D.D., who was shown the bawn, the gauge, the glass, the dog, and the Cloud School slates, in that order, at her own requiring. The bawn low, the day very fair. The Saturday calls became, by the imperceptible degrees in which the chalk does everything, the standing furniture of that summer. Sir Anselm came at 11 and was gone by 1, the proprieties kept to the inch. Mrs. Sparsalt or Tabitha always at the second window of the South Library with needlework that made no progress whatever. And what passed at those 2 hours was, to the disappointment of the Smithy Parliament, exactly what was reported of them: the Register. He brought, the second Saturday, his own grandfather's weather diary of 1747 to 1768, 2 calf octavos smelling of Demory's cedar closet, that the bawn tables might be read against the divas. He brought, the third, the Royal Society's printed papers of the great winters. He asked, and was granted, the favour of standing at the gauge pillar at the noon reading, where he held his hat under his arm and his piece entirely, both at the correct angle. He was a man, Sophia found, who could be silent without making the silence a performance, who asked one question where the county asked 9, and then attended to the answer as if the answer were a witness, and whose laugh, when it was got, which Dorothea could do oftenest, came up from some dry, deep place, like the bawn from the chalk, suddenly, and ran bright, and was gone again into the hill of him. Of his history, the valley had long ago told her the whole, the valley keeping every history but the weather's. The wife, Lady Edith Demory, a Wiltshire deanery's daughter, dead at the winter of 1812 of the scarlet fever, 7 years gone. The baronet, who had been the gayest rider to hounds between the 2 rivers, gone quiet that year at 34, and quiet since. The child reared at Demory by her grandmother the dowager, and a Swiss governess, and adored. The estate kept faultlessly, the society's meetings attended at the spring, and no lady of the 3 counties, though several had been at pains, having moved him in 7 years, to a second Saturday call anywhere. The valley laid these facts at Sophia's door, with the delicacy of a cat presenting game, and Sophia thanked the valley and entered nothing in any book. Dorothea required no such delicacy. Dorothea, by June, had her own glass measure at the Popham gauge. Tabitha had ruled her a little book, with the columns headed in capitals, "The Bawn," "Alive or Dead, and How Much," and had concluded a treaty with Drift, under which the pointer suffered his ears to be arranged in return for the entire ownership of her shadow. And on the second Saturday of that month, finding Miss Popham at the library steps with the volume of 1747 in her hands, she delivered herself, in the loud whisper of 9, of the only courtship the summer ever heard put into words. Papa says, "Your book and our book are the same book in 2 houses. I think when books are the same book, they ought to live on the same shelf. That is what shelves are for. I have a shelf." Her father, across the room, became suddenly and profoundly occupied with the barometer, and Sophia, level as the alcove glass, replied that Miss Demory's doctrine of shelves did her library great credit, and that the present question, however, was whether 1747 had kept a wetter June than 1819, which it had, and the South Library returned with some relief to the 18th century. The Dowager Lady Demory came over from the Diva at the June's 3rd week, unannounced save by one groom riding ahead, which was her own announcing, a small upright woman of 67 in dove-grey silk, with her son's grey eyes set deeper and drier, who had buried a husband and 2 sons and reared her granddaughter, and before whom, the county agreed, bishops minded their grammar. She stayed 2 hours. She required to be shown the register, the gauge, the framed letters of Mr. White, and the stump of the cedar, in that order. She read the Michaelmas page of 1818 through twice, standing in silence, and at her going, at the south porch, drawing on her gloves, she said to Sophia, in the dry voice that was the family's watermark, "I knew your great-uncle, Miss Popham. He danced with me at the Basingstoke assemblies in the year 73, twice, and never looked at the floor once. He was watching the candles gutter and counting the draughts. I conceived that the only promises that family ever broke were to partners, and the sky had all the rest. You appear to be of the same stock. My son has been 7 years learning to look up again. I am too old to say things twice, so I shall say this once. The woman who is shown that register on a second Saturday has been told everything that man will ever find words for, and I expect she knows it." And she went down the steps and into the carriage and was driven away east, leaving the lady of Popham Court at the porch with the dog at her hem, and rather more entered at her own margins than the day's columns strictly provided for. On the Wednesday morning of the 9th of June, the carriage having brought Dorothea for the whole long day by standing treaty, Sir Anselm rode over after it, and the bourne was walked to its head, up the home pasture at the slow pace of a 9-year-old who must inspect everything, over the field stile at the pasture's top, where the down opens and the whole upper valley lies out at one view, the court at its trees below, the church tower, the white lane, the hanger's green shoulder, and the bourne's thread drawn thin and glittering down the middle of it all like a signature, and so along the sheep walk to the combe head, where the springs come up cold through the chalk gravel in a hollow of thorn and old anthills, and a person of 9 may take off her shoes, upon undertaking to mention it to nobody at Demory, and stand in the June-shrunk trickle at the very point Sophia showed her, where alive becomes dead, and the Winterbourne keeps its yearly appointment with its own name. They ate the still-room's cake at the hollow's lip, drift retrieved from a private place under a thorn, a stick of evident antiquity and great personal value, and presented it to the baronet with the air of one conferring the freedom of the valley. And Sir Anselm de Moray, turning the stick in his hands, with his daughter wading the springs and the lady of the court level beside him, in dove grey, with the wind at the fringe of her shawl, looked out down the long bright fall of the valley for a while, and then said, in the voice he kept for the gauge pillar, "Miss Popham, may a man say a thing at the head of your bourne, and leave it lying where the water rises, to take its own pace down?" Sophia said, her eyes at the valley, "He may." "The bourne is slow at this season, sir. Some things that rise at the head in June are not at the meadow till the year turns. I know its habits," said Sir Anselm. "I can wait upon its habits. That is the whole of what I wish to say at present, that I know its habits, and that I am learning the families, and that there is no water in 3 counties I would rather wait upon." And nothing further was said at the Comhead that summer, and the 3 of them and the dog came down the sheep-walk to dinner, with the high cumulus going over slow. And Dorothea's shoes, it was afterwards established at Demory, on the wrong feet. St. Swithin's Day fell on the Thursday that year, the 15th of July, and the whole Bourne Valley, which kept the proverb, as it kept the Candlemas Bourne and the Michaelmas hiring, woke and looked up. The register gave the morning thus: glass 30.8, steady, wind NW, light, sky a high thin veil at dawn, clearing to noon. St. Swithin's Day, fair. The proverb promises the parish 40 days now, and the parish will hold the register answerable for every one of them. It was fair at Demory too, 6 miles east, where a baronet of 41 stood at his own south window at the 8 o'clock with his grandfather's octavo in his hand and his daughter's little book of the Bourne open at his elbow, and read the sky to the west with great attention, and said aloud, to the empty handsome room that had been 7 years too large, 40 days then. And the 40 days, as the parish will tell you to this hour, with the figures, came in fair, every one. On the Thursday morning of the 22nd of July, 1819, the Demory carriage came up the lane to the south porch, out of all pattern, it being neither Saturday nor any day with a treaty attached to it, and Sir Anselm Demory came alone. Mrs. Sparsholt, opening the south library to him, performed her withdrawal to the second window with the needlework at a stateliness that announced to the whole sentient house what the day was about. Tabitha was discovered to have urgent business with the abstract book at the same window inside the minute, and Drift, who had conducted the baronet from the porch with his usual gravity, lay down at the hearth between the two parties with the air of a beadle, keeping a courtroom. Sophia was at the writing table, the morning's reading entered and sanded, the volume of 1819 open at the July page. Sir Anselm did not sit. He stood at the table's end where Mr. Twyford had stood in December, his hat at his hand, and spoke the speech he had evidently prepared at his own south window, in the plain order of a man who has ruled his columns before filling them. Miss Popham, I had not, when I came down to the Easter porch of St. Swithin's at the April of this year, expected this morning. I have loved you, with what dignity I could manage, and with what patience your year of mourning and your single year of this valley required, since the morning you stood at your gage pillar and suffered me to hold my hat and say nothing. I had been 7 years, ma'am, in a country where everyone required me to say something. I am asking now, on no other ground than that I have loved you steadily since that morning, and shall love you steadily whatever this morning's answer is, to do me the honour of becoming my wife. You have known me 1/4 of a year. You have known the register 41. I shall not press the shorter acquaintance against the longer. I ask only that you consider the proposal at your own time, and answer me upon your own terms. And I shall say one thing more, because I would have everything at the table before you rule it. Popham Court is yours and shall remain yours, settled to you absolutely whatever you answer. I have spoken to no purpose with Mr. Twyford else. The register is kept at this house, and shall be kept at this house, and shall be kept by you. I am not asking the keeper away from the book, Miss Popham. I am asking leave to stand at the pillar. If your answer is no, the Saturday calls shall continue unchanged so long as you wish them, and the proposal shall never be raised again. Sophia Popham sat a moment with her hands at rest on either side of the open register, in the quiet of the south library, with the high July light at the 3 windows and the bare end of the highest shelf at the rim of her sight, where there was room, she had observed on her first evening, for perhaps a dozen volumes more. Then she rose, and met the calm grey eyes with the level hazel ones, and gave him her answer in the even voice of the schoolroom and the gage pillar, neither slow nor fast. Sir Anselm, I shall. He took her hand, and bowed over it, and held it a moment in both his, with great care, as a man holds an instrument of value belonging to somebody else, and then, because they were the two people they were, the first thing the 6th Baronet Demory said to his affianced wife in the first minute of their engagement was, "What did the glass stand at this morning?" And the first thing she answered him was, "At 30.16, sir, and steady. Set fair." And at the second window Mrs. Sparsholt and Tabitha abandoned the needlework and the abstract book together, and wept, comprehensively, into one shared and entirely inadequate handkerchief, while the dog beat the floor with his white-tipped tail, slow and loud, like the parish's cracked bell got home at last, to its own belfry. Dorothea received the news at Demory that afternoon, her father having ridden back with it himself, and made answer. The Dowager reported it by letter to the court within the week, the Dowager's letters being the dry, deep family laugh made ink. First, that she had arranged it from the beginning at the school inspection, before either party was attending. Second, that the books would now be on the same shelf, as foretold. And third, after a silence, in quite another voice, that she should have somebody now to show her book to at breakfast, whereupon the 6th Baronet was discovered to require something from the gun-room, and was some little time finding it. The wedding was set for the Saturday morning of the 4th of September. The harvest by then carried, and the Proverbs 40 days, the parish pointed out, expiring punctually within the week. The banns of marriage between Anselm Damery, baronet of the parish of Damery, widower, and Sophia Popham, of this parish, spinster, were asked at St. Swithin's of Popham on the Bourne on the 3 Sunday mornings of the 8th and the 15th and the 22nd of August, the Reverend Josiah Penton reading them at a shine that threatened the lectern, the Cloud School holding itself rigid with importance in the gallery, and the cracked bell, at each conclusion, getting somewhat above itself. Mr. Twyford came up at the second week with the settlements, which were as the baronet had stated them at the table. Popham Court, its lands, its funds, and its register settled upon the wife absolutely, to her own hand and her own heirs, and the old solicitor, laying down the pen at the South Library after the signing, polished the gold spectacles at his handkerchief and observed to the room at large that he had drawn marriage settlements for 40 years, and had found at last a bridegroom who conveyed away his advantage with the satisfaction of a man acquiring one, and that he should have the clause framed. The preparations were of the plain Hampshire order the house had kept all its days. Mrs. Overton, the Winchester dressmaker, Patience's aunt, summoned up the valley by a letter that caused, the school reported, an entirely unprofessional commotion at Kingsgate Street. Cut the bride's gown at the court itself at the August's last fortnight, a plain cream India muslin, high at the waist in the year's fashion, but long in the sleeve at the bride's own requiring, the bodice worked by Mrs. Overton's needle, with a single small running sprig, and no other ornament whatever. And at the fitting, at the long glass in the south chamber, it was Mrs. Sparsholt who brought in the flat velvet case from the writing table and would not be argued with, and the Popham pearls. Winchester, 1763, the mothers of the man who had written that they wanted wearing, went round the bride's throat at last, the housekeeper's hands not perfectly steady at the clasp, and the room very quiet. Miss Alresford wrote from the school that she should attend if the county fell into the sea, and was answered that a chaise would be at Kingsgate Street at 7. The dowager sent over, the week before, wrapped in silver paper and a single line, "The women of this family wear it once and keep it always. It has been waiting 21 years for a wife worth the lace. Do not write back anything wet. The Damery Vale, Brussels Point, 1764." And on the Wednesday morning of the 1st of September, the day coming up washed and bright after a night's soft rain, Sophia walked up the home pasture to the field stile at the top of the down with Tabitha and Dorothea and the dog, and the 3 of them gathered harebells at the sheep walk, the small dry bells of the chalk, the exact blue of a fair weather zenith at evening, enough for the bride's bodice and the bridesmaid's basket, and the register, at the 2 o'clock, noted the wind at west, the glass at 30 or 4 and steady, the swallows beginning to gather at the Great Barnes Ridge, and the bourne at the meadow below, dead, dry, and waiting its turn at the year, in the appointed manner of its kind. The Saturday morning of the 4th of September, 1819, came up the Bourne Valley, in the way the registers 2 and 40 Septembers said the best of them come. A white ground mist at first light, lying along the meadow like wool at a fold, the down standing clear gold above it, the mist burning through by 8 into a high blue morning with small fair weather cumulus, going over slow from the west, the air rinsed and still, the first yellow at the hanger's rim. Sophia Popham took the 8 o'clock reading of her wedding morning herself, at the gauge pillar, in her dressing gown with her hair already dressed, because a register is a promise, and because she wished to, and the entry stands in the volume of 1819 in her even script, the figures exact, and at the line's end 6 words that were her great-uncle's and her own together. A fair day from end to end. The parish church of St. Swithins of Popham on the Bourne was full by 10, and the churchyard fuller. The Cloud School stood both sides of the path from the Lich Gate in its Sunday best, under strict treaty as to silence, and under no treaty whatever as to grinning. Jem the sexton's boy had the south door. The farms and the hamlets and the smithy parliament packed the aisles. Miss Alresford sat at the second pew in grey silk, with 6 boarders ranged at her left, and her needle for one morning of her life. Nowhere about her. Mrs. Sparsholt wept steadily from 10:15, beginning before there was anything to weep at, on the sound principle of an old campaigner who distrusts a rush. Mr. Hambledon stood at the tower door in the 98 Port's own dignity. Mr. Longstock had the brown cob in the lane, groomed to a conker. The Dowager Lady de Moray sat at the chancel in dove grey, and the de Moray pearls, upright as the tower. And at the chancel step waited the 6th baronet in plain dark blue over cream, the silver signet at his hand, watching the west door, between sentences, at the particular quarter from which his weather was coming. The bride came up the lane from the court on Mr. Twyford's arm. She had asked him at the August's first Saturday, at the chambers in St. Thomas Street, and the old solicitor had taken off the gold spectacles and polished them at length, and replied at last that he had given Miss Popham away, once already at that table, the November before, to an estate, and that he counted it the best conveyance of his 40 years, and should be honoured to execute the second and better one in person. The bride, as the parish keeps it, came up the lane in plain cream, India muslin with long sleeves, the Popham pearls at her throat, the Brussels veil thrown back, harebells at the bodice, her mother's small silver locket inside it where such things ride, and her father's shagreen thermometer case in the carriage behind her in the reticule, because the promises of a life keep no holidays from one another. And Miss Dorothea de Moray walked behind her with a basket of harebells and the concentration of artillery practice, in a white frock, with her shoes, the dowager established at the Lich Gate by one downward glance on the correct feet. The Reverend Josiah Penton read the marriage service of the Church of England in the gentle level scholar's voice the parish had had of him 16 years, and the light of the high blue morning came through the plain south glass and lay gold along the chancel as it had lain at Easter. And Anselm Damery, baronet, of the parish of Damery, took Sophia Popham, of this parish, to his wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better for worse, for richer for poorer, in sickness and in health, till death them did part, in the level Hampshire fashion the two families had kept all their days. And Sophia Popham took Anselm de Moray in the same words and the same fashion, in the even voice of the schoolroom and the gauge pillar, neither slow nor fast, audible at the tower door. And the ring went on, and the register, the parish's own, this one, the 3rd book of that morning's 3, was signed in the vestry, the bride writing Sophia Popham at the last time of writing it with the pen at its accustomed level pace, and the witnesses' names going under in their order: Twyford, Josiah Penton, Margaret Alresford, Martha Sparsholt, the hand not perfectly steady, but the letters proud, and the cracked bell and its 2 whole sisters fell to above them all, and got, by general consent, and for the only time in living memory, entirely above themselves, and were not spoken to about it. The wedding breakfast at the south dining-room of Popham Court was the plain Hampshire wedding breakfast the house had kept at every wedding of its history. The Bourne trout and the down mutton, the still-room's hams and the harvest loaves, plum cake by Mrs. Sparsholt at one end of the table, and a seed cake by the rectory's cook at the other, in a rivalry 16 years old and not concluded yet. The 98 port at the gentlemen and the cowslip wine of the late spring at the ladies. The dowager at the bride's right hand, Miss Alresford at the groom's, the rector at the cake, the Cloud School at the lawn with a table of its own, and Jem the sexton's boy at the head of it. And at the hearth end of the room, on the floor, with his grey muzzle on his paws and his amber eyes making the slow circuit of his entire flock gathered for once into one fold, the old pointer, who had reviewed every soul of them at the door and passed them, and would do the same at their going, the appointment having been his own idea from the beginning. Sir Anselm rose at the breakfast's end and made the only speech of the day, which the valley repeats yet at its weddings, that he had been asked what settled the matter for him, and would answer at once, in company, so that the answer should be on the parish record, like the banns. That it had not been the register, though the register had brought him to the porch, it had been the resuming, the ruled double line under the 26 blank days, and the level entry beneath it, and a young woman alone in a strange house at 8 in the morning of her second day in it, keeping a dead man's promise to the sky, because it had become her own, and a man who has stood 7 years at a window, said the 6th baronet, lifting his glass to his wife. No set fair when at last he reads it. The register, gentlemen, and its keeper, and the long days coming. If you have kept the gentle Hampshire morning at the South Library of Popham Court, these 10 months past at Sophia's quiet hand, from the rain gauge at Kingsgate Street, and the express at the garden gate, through the green wafer and the 41 volumes, the Michaelmas page read level at the December noon, and the fall of the proud man's golden afternoon, the cuttings at the end papers, and the blank page kept for shame, the Easter porch and the bourne walked to its head. Then the 3 bells of St. Swithin's, the cracked one loudest, have rung the 4th of September, in at your own ear, in the level Hampshire fashion, the Popham family kept all their days, and the register at the South Library writing table stands open at the September page, the morning entered, the promise kept and carrying, and the quiet keeping of it is yours now also, at your own window, at whatever weather your own year is making. For that is the whole doctrine of the House of Popham, that no day faithfully recorded was ever wholly a bad one. They wintered between the 2 houses, the new Lady Damery keeping the Tuesdays and the Fridays at Popham Court by standing arrangement, the 8 o'clock and the 2 and the 10, taken at Damery or at Popham, but taken always, the abstracts going up to Mr. Luke Howard at every month's turn. The 2nd volume of his great work on the climate, when it came down from London the following year, carried at the head of its Hampshire tables the line from the register kept at Popham Court in the valley of the Bourne, 1778 to the present, by E.P. and S.D., unbroken, and Dorothea's little book of the Bourne, promoted to a marbled quarto of its own, with the columns ruled by Tabitha, beginning at Damory Court on the 1st of January 1820. A register that the Diva Valley speaks of now, as the chalk once spoke of her stepmother's, the Damery Register, vol I, kept at first in a large round hand with the assistance of breakfast, and not broken either, to this day. And at the March of 1820, on a soft grey-growing morning with the rooks beginning the high elms, the lady of Popham Court came up the lane from Damory with her husband and her stepdaughter and the dog, and Mr. Longstock met them at the terrace's west end with 2 men, a barrow, and a young cedar of Lebanon, got at the Winchester nurserymen's against this morning by an order the steward had taken in October without being given it, and Sophia Damory, in her garden gloves, set the young tree in the turf 11 paces from the South Library window, a little east of the broad sawn stump that stayed where 60 years of shade had stood. "The stump bides, my lady," said Mr. Longstock, filling in. "A man wants both, the mark of what the weather can do, and the start of what a family does about it." And the register of that day records the planting in one line, between the wind and the glass, without adjectives, in the manner of the house. A cedar set at the west end of the terrace. Soft rain at evening, very kind, the bourne running full. And so on the warm, pale gold Sunday morning of the 12th of November 1820, in the parish church of St. Swithins of Popham on the Bourne, under a high-washed autumn sky, with the first frost of the season white, at the home pasture at the 8 o'clock, reading and gone by 10, a daughter, born at Popham Court at the October's end, in the chamber over the South Library. Her first cry heard, Mrs. Sparsholt always maintained, at the very stroke of the 10 o'clock reading, which the household held to be the blood declaring itself, was christened Lavinia Rosamond de Moray at the old stone font, by the Reverend Josiah Penton, the Dowager Lady de Moray standing godmother in dove grey, and the family pearls, Mr. Twyford standing godfather with the gold spectacles polished glittering bright, and Miss Dorothea de Moray, 11 now and grave as a verger, holding the shawl's trailing end at her stepmother's elbow by right of treaty, and the entry in the Popham Register for that Sunday, in the even script that would rule its columns at the same table for 52 years more, gives the glass at 30:12 and rising, the wind at northwest and light, the Bourne come down early and running bright at the meadow, the sky cloudless from rim to rim, and at the line's end, in the quiet Hampshire fashion, her mother's mother, Mrs. Rosamond Popham, née Uvedale, had kept all her days, and her great-great-uncle, Mr. Erasmus Popham, at the same window before her. The register says only, and has never in all the years since needed to say more, a fair day from end to end, and tomorrow will be fair also. The register goes on.